Well, welcome. I know a lot of you, but I'm Linda Kuhn, Dean of the Honors College. I am a humanist. I went to graduate school in medieval history. And so I'm very pleased to do what I don't think we've done this before. I defer to Katie. Have we ever done any kind of workshop on graduate school in humanities?
I don't think we have. This may be our first.
So let me congratulate you all on your fine taste. A, pursuing graduate work in the humanities is the best thing on the planet. B, you have really good taste in joining us tonight because we have 3 exceptional alumni with us, each of whom have taken a humanistic track, although a little bit different in each case, which I think is why we have an awesome triumvirate. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce each of our speakers. And after I do, I'm going to ask each of them to give a little, a brief statement about what attracted them to go to graduate school, and maybe a little bit about experience or how they segued that experience. I know that in the case of Ms. Jones, she certainly has become a fine educator, teaching people the humanistic way. So, and then I'm going to turn, after our speakers give a statement, then we're going to open it up for Q&A. And then I'm going to bring in our faculty experts who are here to give tips on how to make yourself super competitive. So let's start with our alumni in alphabetical order. First, I'll start with Jacob Doss. If you want to wave, Jacob. Woot. There's Jacob, who's I think in UT Austin right now. Jacob is actually from Fayetteville, and he graduated from the University of Arkansas with a double major in history and cultural anthropology and a minor in religious studies. He went from Arkansas up to Boston College, where he got a master's in a fine program in medieval studies. He's now a PhD candidate, writing his dissertation, I believe, at the University of Texas in Austin. His dissertation is entitled Making Monastic Men, Reforming the Novitiate in the Long 12th Century, which addresses the intersection of constructions of childhood and gender, especially focused on Cistercian monks and how that influenced gender ideals through their strategies for training new recruits into mature masculine members of the community. He's had a lot of grants: American Historical Association, Medieval Academy of America, American Catholic Historical Association, super hip Hill Museum and Manuscript Library in Minnesota, and the University of Texas. And so he's currently living in Austin, Texas. So let's all give a great Honors College wave to our first presenter, soon to be Professor Jacob Doss. And then Jean Jones, another rock star graduate of the Fulbright College of Arts and Sciences and the Honors College, who, while she was at the University of Arkansas, did a 5-year plan because she was on the super prestigious and hard to get Gates Millennium Scholarship. Hoot, hoot, hoot. And I think, the more you can luxuriate in your studies, Jean, the better, right? And so she, like Jacob, did a lot of really interesting things while she was here. She majored in English and took classes both in literature and creative writing, minoring in anthropology, political science, gender studies, and African American studies. Yes, this is what we love to see. Our adventurous intellectuals in the humanities. She graduated summa cum laude, whoot, and did a gap year. That might be something that y'all are interested in too, about how do you prepare yourself during a gap year. During her gap year, she applied to graduate schools focused on prepping teachers for urban environments, while simultaneously taking a few graduate courses in English at the University of Arkansas. She got into all kinds of really awesome places, so you're going to get good tips. Chapel Hill, Michigan, Harvard Graduate School of Education. And so she went on the market deciding where she wanted to go. See, this is a great model, right? I love this. Ultimately deciding to go to Harvard and working in education with a focus on teaching and curriculum development. For the past 10 years, it hasn't been really that long, has it? Man, Wow, I'm so old.
Yeah, I just started my 11th year teaching.
Oh my God, I'm so old. Working at Urban Middle School, servicing grades 6th, 7th, and 8th, teaching English liberal arts strategies, which has a test prep course, and becoming special ed certified, which I think is super important. And some of y'all might be interested in that as well. So teaching the humanities, awesome calling, right? Not a job, it's a calling, as Jean has done so beautifully. And she worked here with the amazing Susan Marin, whom some of you may have had in the Department of English. And we also have, in graduate school right at this moment, and that is Curry Kennedy. And Curry is here. I don't know if you want to give a little wave. And Curry worked also, like Jean, in creative writing in English. I have to say, even though I'm a historian, these are awesome majors, right? English is the humanities bomb. He worked with Padma Viswanathan, and he graduated magna cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa, chosen to speak. And by the way, I remember you speaking, Curry. It was an awesome job at the Fulbright College graduation ceremony. And so that is an awesome honor. He's currently a PhD candidate in English at a fine graduate program at Pennsylvania State University, where he's specializing in rhetoric. So what a trio. Again, awesome alumni who chose paths that are decidedly humanistic. So why don't we go ahead and have each of y'all give us a statement, however you want, your experiences, what was really great, how you've never regretted being a humanist, I hope. And I'll go ahead, this time I'll reverse the order and I'll start at the bottom of the alphabet. Why don't we start with Curry Kennedy? I don't know if we have to unmute you, or there you go. Okay.
I've got it. Yeah. Wow. I can't believe I go first. So yeah, the story of how I came to graduate school. First of all, it's very nice to see you all, because I was in your shoes not too long ago, except not in your shoes at all, because I didn't graduate during a pandemic. But I was a creative writing major and enjoyed it very much, and regret nothing about doing creative writing in English. Worked with Padma, and she was a fantastic mentor, and the faculty were fantastic. But toward the end of my undergrad career, I started to realize that the thing I liked most about language or about creative writing was that it was all about how words change people. And then someone told me that there's this discipline called rhetoric, which is all about how words change people. And I wanted to learn more about that. But I hadn't taken any rhetoric classes whatsoever. And so I thought, well, I don't know, maybe I won't get to study rhetoric. And then someone told me you can take a gap year, which I didn't know you could do. You'd be astonished at how much I didn't know at the time. But someone told me, it won't hurt your chances at all if you take a gap year. And so I did, and I went to an event not unlike this at a bookstore downtown in Fayetteville on Dixon Street. And I remember asking somebody there, hey, what do you think I should do during my gap year? And the person I didn't know at all, and I haven't seen since, but he said, without thinking, he said, get a manual labor job. Get a manual labor job for this year, because it'll teach you whether you really want to go back to school or not. And so I did that. I joined with a friend of mine, and we started a small sort of leadership program for boys from disadvantaged homes. And I took them and we mowed lawns in subdivisions and things like that. And I learned that it was true that I did want to go back to school, because when the boys went back to school after that summer, I was just mowing. And it was just square after square after square of mowing. And I kind of lost its sort of glamour for me, this idea that I would go and have this manual labor job, and it would be, it would scratch the intellectual itch I had. So I remember I used to drive around in my truck with my riding lawnmower in the back and my sack lunch and my book of literary theory on the passenger seat. And I had the manual labor job, and I teamed up with a professor of rhetoric at Arkansas. He just retired. His name is David Jolliffe. I just went to his office one day and I was like, would you be all right if I read books on rhetoric and came and talked to you about them? And he said, of course. And this is something you'll learn about professors if you haven't already. Professors love when students come to them and ask if they can like join them in the humanistic enterprise. It's never an imposition. Maybe 1 in a million is annoyed at it, but 9,900,000 out of the million do just love it. And it can't hurt you to ask them and to go to their office hours, which they set aside for you. I know that when I was in the office of professors, when I was in your position, I always felt like I had to get out as soon as possible because they were doing important things. And if I didn't get out as soon as possible, then they would lose interest in me or they'd be upset with me. So I applied to several schools, ended up getting into Penn State and went there to study rhetoric. And it was the best way I can describe it. I remember thinking this when I first got here. It's a lot like becoming a baby again to be in graduate school, or a lot like if you've ever done immersive language study. So you're in a place where you've got some knowledge of what's going on, but everybody talks funny in a way that's alien to you. And so you're catching things, you're sitting in graduate seminars and graduate classes and people are using language that you don't really know as well as they do or they seem to. And so you're sitting there trying to catch little snippets. At the same time, you're learning to talk because there's a totally different way of talking that goes with graduate humanistic studies. And it's at first it's very bewildering and it's kind of scary and it's intimidating. And if you haven't heard of the idea of imposter syndrome yet, you should get familiarized with that, because everyone who goes to graduate school thinks that it was by some mistake that they were let into graduate school, and that in fact they are not talented and not smart, and everyone has been fooled by them so far, and that they're soon going to be found out, and then everyone's going to be disappointed and send you home because you turned out not to be what people thought you were. But the truth is, everyone feels that way when it comes to graduate school, literally everyone. And after you get over that hump, years 2, 3, 4, you start to feel faculty. Dean Kuhn says faculty feel the same way. Once you start to get over that stuff, you really start to experience a transformation in yourself, your sense of self. Because the best thing I've gotten out of my PhD is it's no longer possible for me to be pushed around intellectually. I might have been unjustifiably self-confident before graduate school, but now I have a justifiable confidence, not that I know everything or I have nothing else to learn, but that I can learn, and that I can read things for myself and make decisions on big questions for myself. And that's probably the biggest gift that I've gotten so far. And so now I'm in my last year, I'm writing my dissertation. I study how Shakespeare and John Milton and people in that era learned how to write and read and speak and listen, and try to think about what that means for how we teach people to write and read and speak and listen today. And I'm on a job market that is extremely grim, and we can talk about what that looks like, but I think my other panelists will know a lot more about that since they're past this stage. But so that's me, and hopefully we'll have more chances to elaborate in the Q&A.
Oh, you will. Don't worry. Thank you so much. Wow. All right, Jean Jones, take it away.
Sure. Yeah, so I went to graduate school initially, I think, because I felt like it was one of those things that I had to do, because to be a teacher in a lot of areas, you need to have a master's degree, which I didn't actually know whenever I initially decided that I wanted to teach. So I started out with that idea of, okay, I have to do this because I need to do it to get a job. But I, in the process of taking the classes, had a lot of realizations and sort of truths that came along with it that made me value it just for the sake of valuing it. And since graduate school, I've realized and learned, as I've worked with various people throughout my career, I can kind of evaluate what their graduate school programs were like based on what they bring to the teaching profession. So it's interesting, Curry, that you mentioned that one of the things that you fell in love with is and wanted to study is how words change people, because that's something that I feel like as a teacher is extremely important to understand and to know. And that's something that I felt like I learned in my graduate school program. It's something that I kind of knew beforehand, but it's something that really was hammered home to me through various classes that I took about education. Our big thing that we talked about in all of our classes all of the time was, what is your purpose for this assignment? What is your purpose for this lesson? And what are you trying to accomplish? And then after you figure out your purpose, how do you measure your words, or how do you put explanations and things like that into the lesson that can help students to expand their minds in some way? So that's something that I really love about teaching, is helping students to try and think about how their words have impact, how other people's words have an impact as well. And that's part of why I teach English language arts as opposed to teaching something else. I feel like English language arts is an amazing field just because it's so much about what it means to be a person. It's so much about what it means to be human. And I've always loved to read. I've always loved books. And so one of the other reasons that I wanted to teach is to sort of spread that love to other people, which is something that I hope I'm doing. But as Curry said, you sometimes feel like an imposter. And sometimes with middle school students, I definitely feel like an imposter because they will call you out if they feel like, you're not being real with them. So that's something that I've had to learn. That's more of a practice thing that I've learned. It's something that I didn't learn in graduate school. And in terms of teaching, I think sometimes for graduate school, it's like it was great in some ways because it gave me a really solid academic foundation for how to structure lessons and how to think about why I'm doing what I'm doing. But in terms of practical, like on the ground, this happened in your classroom strategies, a lot of that came from being on the job. So you'll see whenever you decide to apply, or whatever career path your life takes you, that there will be some things that you'll get out of graduate school that will be really amazing life lessons that you can kind of take with you for the rest of your life. But then there's other things that you just won't know until you actually get into a job. And that's just how things work. And when you're an adult, I feel weird saying that because I don't feel like an adult sometimes. I feel lost in my own skin, especially with this pandemic. And having to teach virtually is its own insane sort of monster. But it's something that I'm grappling with, and it's something that we're all in together. And so we're kind of supporting each other through it. And I don't have any regrets about, my life path. I wanted to be a teacher since I was very, very young. So I'm literally living my dream. It's very nerdy to say that, but I'm literally living my dream. And it's very hard sometimes, but I think that going to graduate school was very helpful for me in terms of getting to where I wanted to be in my life. And then I've very much enjoyed even postgraduate school, whenever I did graduate coursework to get certified in special education. That was a decision that I had to make of like, am I ready to go back to school again? Because I had been in school for so long. But it was something that I wanted to do. And so that's why I decided to transition into special ed.
All right, fantastic career route. And yeah, don't ever become an adult. That's why we all go to school all the time, right? Yeah. The adult world is overrated, Jean.
Yeah, it's true.
All right, our third member of our alumni panel, I'm going to turn the floor over to Jacob Doss. All right,
Hi,
Jacob.
everybody. Thank you. Well, where to start? When I came to the University of Arkansas, I knew that I always wanted to do history, to be a history major. And so when I got to campus, my original kind of nebulous plan for my education was to study World War II and then maybe go to law school. Well, I took Dr. Kuhn's History of Christianity class, and that completely changed my path. It's completely her fault that I'm what I'm doing now. But anyways, I took perhaps a little more circuitous route to get to where I am now. I took some time off and worked in a law firm for a little bit and completely disabused myself of that career path. And then applied and actually I did my master's in medieval historical theology. And then now I'm here at the University of Texas. So through all of that, I guess one of the things I've bounced around in discipline and then bounced around in area too. And so at Arkansas, I did history. I started with history, but wound up in cultural anthropology, and then also did the religious studies minor. And so, and then bouncing to historical theology, and then now to, I guess, plain old history. And so for me, I guess I had very wide interests, and it was kind of a path of discovery, if you will. I thought I knew what I wanted, but every time I did something new, I found something else that I was interested in, and moved on to that. And so that's kind of how I ended up getting to Texas. And then also along the way, there's been very particular people that I've wanted to work with, and that's kind of guided me through where I've gone as well. So I guess that's kind of the broad overview. I'm sure there'll be questions and things that that I can be more specific about if we want to move on to that. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Jacob. Wow, you guys are great. Man, I'm gonna put you on retainer, all three of you. All right, now is the time in our panel that we're going to open it up for questions, and then we'll turn to the faculty experts to get some tips on how to really make yourself competitive. Q&A. Yeah, let's do it the old-fashioned way. All right, Rachel. Oh, I'm going to have Megan, actually. Megan, you're going to be in charge of the Q&A. So go ahead, Rachel, unmute and.
Cool, thank you. My question is specifically for Ms. Jones. I'm actually also on track to be an English teacher, and I'm very excited about it. But I was wondering, would you recommend doing graduate school while teaching, or waiting to at least get your master's and then go to start teaching?
That's a great question. And I think I would say that it depends on the rigor and intensity of the program in which you apply. I didn't realize whenever I first started applying that some programs are structured to last over 1 year and some are structured to last 2 years or longer, depending on how the university runs it. So the program that I actually ended up deciding to do, the one at Harvard, was only a year, and you couldn't physically work during it because there was just too much. They actually told us when we first all arrived to campus, they said, if you have a job, you should probably quit it because it's not going to be possible for you to juggle the coursework, the student teaching aspect, and the job, if you have a job. And there was this one guy, I remember, he was like, whatever, I'll be able to do it. I'm a boss. But he quit his job 3 weeks later because it was too much going on. So the short answer is it depends on the program. And then the longer answer is you have to think about kind of what is manageable for you as a person. If you're the kind of person that tends to struggle with juggling many aspects, then I would say, don't teach while doing the program. But if you are someone who thrives on, having lots of different balls in the air, then you can certainly do that, because I know people who have done it who work at my school. So
thank you.
You're welcome.
Victoria, I saw before that you might have had a question. Do you still have one?
Yes, I do. Thank you so much, Megan. So I was curious, when you are, this is a question for all three of you, when you are looking for like a specific type of graduate program, like you kind of have an idea of what you want to study. I know for me, I have like a really specific idea of what I want to do going forward. Do you have any advice for like how to best research graduate programs? And then like after that research is kind of done, how you evaluated the graduate school programs to decide which ones to apply to, and then after receiving back your acceptance letters, like how you decided which graduate program to actually attend?
Victoria, before we answer, could we hear what you want to do?
Sure, absolutely. I want to become a legal librarian, a legal research librarian.
So I have some ideas that I can share, and then of course, if other people want to chime in, feel free. I graduated so long ago that I think it's a little bit different now. I was kind of using, I don't know if you even know if people even look at like US News and World Report anymore. To think about, you know, what schools are out there. But that's the basic kind of where I started. I looked at, okay, what are some good schools that have good rankings for education programs? And I knew that I wanted to focus on urban ed. So that helped to cull the list quite a bit, actually, because a lot of programs are for education in general and do not have classes specific to working with urban students. So that's one of the things that helped me to narrow it down when I was researching which programs to apply. And I decided to apply based on that kind of ranking system. I wanted to go to a school that was thought of as a quote unquote good school. I didn't want to just go to some random school. I was lucky in that I had funding. So that's another thing you have to consider. If you don't have funding, then you might have to set your sights a little bit differently based on what is, you know, what's available to you. But I had funding. So it was like, since money was not an obstacle, that was something that didn't hinder where I decided to go. And then how I decided to actually attend, I traveled to Michigan to meet with faculty, and I traveled there to meet with some students who were in the program. I had never been to the Detroit or Ann Arbor area, so I wanted to see what that was like. I had already visited the Boston and Cambridge area because I did alternative spring break at the U of A, which I don't know if they still do that, but essentially what that is instead of going to party in Florida on spring break, you go and do a service project somewhere. So, so I had already visited Boston, Cambridge area, and I knew that I liked that area. And I didn't end up visiting North Carolina, but I did speak to some people who were in the program there on the phone, via email. I spoke to faculty and I spoke to students. And those kinds of conversations that I had with people really helped me decide where do I actually want to go, because I kind of could go with the like a gut feeling or kind of like a vibe that I got from people, as opposed to just what you read over email or electronically.
Yeah, I concur with all of that. I think that's all really good. If there's someone in your discipline at the University of Arkansas, they're a great resource for telling you what's a good school in this discipline. I'm not sure what the norms are for people who are doing library studies, but in English they tell us if you're not going to get funding to go to a school, do not go to the school. It's not worth getting a PhD if you're going to go into debt, and perhaps even more debt if you have undergraduate debt. So that would be a big choice criterion. And then the other thing which you're looking for in a school, again, I'm not sure what happens in library studies. In English studies, you end up working with one faculty advisor after a couple of years. So it's good to know, are there people in this department who are teaching the things that I'm interested in? And you can look on the websites of the schools to do that. Sometimes they're not updated, and that's not good, in which case I would suggest either having some faculty advisor that you have here introducing you over email, or just emailing them and asking, hey, what's going on with with, you know, people like you're a smart person. But yeah, as far as choices go, it has a lot to do with a lot of factors. You want to think about, are you good in the cold? If you have a partner, are they good in the cold? Are you good away from home? If you have a partner, are they good away from home? How much do you prioritize having access to like a big metropolitan area or something like that? This is depending on what school. If the school is like, if you're going to be a different kind of person than that usually goes to the school, you want to ask yourself whether that's something that you're prepared to do. because I've got a lot of friends of color who come to Penn State, which is in the middle of what they call Pennsyltucky. It's Philadelphia on one end, Pittsburgh on the other end, and then a bunch of farmland in the middle. And they're struggling because they're from major metropolitan areas, and they feel a little bit like they're on an island. So anyway, those are some factors to think about when you're thinking about school choice.
Yeah, and there can be a real sense of culture shock depending on where you go. Going from Arkansas to the Boston area is it can be shocking in some ways.
Yeah, I remember coming back to Texas for like, I don't know, Christmas break, and I was amazed at how much the people at restaurants, like the servers, wanted to talk to me. Like they were so polite and sweet, which wasn't the same at Penn State.
Kind of along the same lines. I mean, I've switched disciplines when I went to my first master's program, and also went to Boston. And for me, I spent quite a bit of time reading scholars that I was interested in. I don't know if this applies for library science, but there might be others that are out there. Reading scholars that I was interested in, that piqued my interest, that and looking for people that I could work with that were very close to what I wanted to do. Like you were saying earlier, you're going to work with people, with one or two very specific people at a time usually. So that's one of the things that I spend a lot of time, put aside a lot of time to do a lot of that research as well.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all of your advice.
I'll just say one more thing about the library studies. There's a school in the Boston area. It's a private school called Simmons. And I don't know if you've researched their library studies program at all. But when I first started teaching, I kind of had a crisis of like, am I cut out for this job? Or should I, do something else? So I actually went to some like informational sessions there and was talking to people there. And I got a really good feeling sort of from the people that I talked to there that their program was really good. So that's a school that if you haven't heard of, or if you, if you're kind of looking for a direction to go to, you could look at their program and see if it seems like something that you would like. The people when I met them at the different workshops I went to, they all seemed very helpful and very into, what they were doing, which I think is another thing that's important about having conversations with people whenever you're looking for professors that you want to work under. You want to make sure that it's something that they're truly passionate about, so that you can actually sort of learn from them instead of, they're just there doing their job and they're really there more to research than they are to sort of teach you. I think it's better to get people who it seems like you can relate with whenever you're trying to study under someone.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
All right, is there another question? You can raise your hand. Oh, Michael.
Yeah, hi, my name is Michael Furman. I first want to thank the three of y'all for doing this, because this has been awesome so far. I've really appreciated everything. And my question kind of goes along that line of that path of discovery that Jacob was talking about earlier. One thing that I know in my junior year is that I have just kind of all these interests, and it's like time to like start making decisions about what I want to pursue and what I want to study. And one thing that kind of keeps coming up to, especially I think students kind of in my class right now, is the idea of dual degree programs and dual master programs. And I've just kind of gotten mixed reviews, not just kind of from everybody, about kind of those kinds of programs being too broad, or you're not going to get enough out of either degree kind of ideas. And so I didn't know if maybe you guys personally had any experience with those, or maybe you had colleagues or peers that went through those kinds of programs, and kind of their takeaways, or just like your personal opinions on like finding your focus in grad school and like the dual degree specifically.
So Michael, I'm going to ask a follow-up question. What are you looking to do?
Yeah, so it's right now I'm kind of looking towards both like a historical kind of master's similar to Jacob as well, Dean Kuhn has wrapped me into the religious studies. Um, but then also another part of me really is interested in public policy, specifically like higher ed and public ed policy, which is kind of crazy that Gene, hearing from you has been really awesome too today. So that's kind of where it's like, I'm trying to merge these two things. And so I've looked at programs that are like duals in religious studies and public policy, or religious studies and education. So that, yeah.
All the contact that I have with people who do dual degrees are people who are doing dual degrees in like English and African American studies, or English and women's gender and sexuality studies and things like that. From what I've seen here at Penn State is that those people have a good time combining those things, and they do get jobs after school. Now, if you're thinking about public policy, that's kind of a different world, I think, a little bit than what I'm seeing. But they seem to find it fulfilling to study two things at once. And ultimately in the humanities, things are becoming less and less disciplinary. And people with interdisciplinary experience are usually seen as assets, especially if they're really actually good at both things.
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback off of that, I was going to say, if you can study more than one thing and do a good job at it, that will, I think, only make you more marketable. At least in the education world, part of like the fact that I studied special ed after studying working with gen ed students has made me able to qualify, so to speak, for more than one job. So if you were able to, study more than one in more than one area and do a good job at both, I think that's great. The other thing that I would say is you guys are so young, and it's going to sound probably, I don't know, a little ageist of me to say this, but when you are first thinking about graduate school, or when you're first thinking about, oh, I'm going to be an adult, whatever, your brain just kind of goes in a path, maybe for some people, and other people there is no path. And for some people, they go on a path and then they decide to do something else. I went to graduate school with, I want to say there were 40 people in my cohort. And of the 40 of us, I think only half of us are still teaching. So, I mean, you can choose one thing, but then you might fall in love with something else, and that's totally fine. It's totally fine to change your mind. You do have to consider, all those things like culture of a place and how much money you're going into debt with and all that stuff. But I think at the end of the day, if you find something that you love, then that's probably the most important thing, because if you find something that you love, then once you get a job after, your life won't be as much of a struggle. I think that's my personal opinion, of course, but that's what I would say. If you go one path and then you end up doing something else, that's totally fine.
I was just going to say, to kind of piggyback off the piggyback. One thing too that you might think about, I mean, I think a lot of times people that go into dual degree doctorate programs have a pretty specific focus on what they want to do. That dual degree is going to help them achieve that. And I'm not so sure. One thing that I've seen, say here at UT, especially in the history department, we also have a lot of students who are doing, say, modern American history, but they're also doing a lot of different classes in, say, the LBJ School of Public Policy or something like this. And I've had a few friends who have done that, and with the purpose of going into government work or something like this, rather than doing a dual degree. Now, to talk about the interdisciplinary nature of a lot of PhD programs these days, I know for myself, I've taken over half of my coursework as a PhD student in other departments outside of history. So I've done several courses in art history, several courses in religious studies, and these sorts of things. And so there is a lot of times, I think, flexibility in the coursework you take that you can then use to talk about to do a lot of different jobs, or to kind of position yourself in a way that will help you get, do something that you're looking to do, whether that be in academia eventually, or something outside of academia. So that's, I guess, to sum up, what I would say is you can also look around and see what other departments a school is strong in, and see if, send an email to somebody and just ask them if you can take classes outside of the department as well. So that's one thing I've done.
All right. Wow. This is awesome advice, by the way. But I'm going to turn now, in fact, maybe even pursuing that issue of dual degrees or interdisciplinarity in graduate school. I'm going to turn first to my colleague, Kelly Hammond, because she's been to graduate school a lot more recently than I. She's a graduate of Georgetown, and I would say that also a program that has multiple strengths: Asian history, Asian studies, international education, global studies, etc. So I don't know if you want to unmute here, Dr. Hammond, and share some views on the conversation, and then I'll bring in Trish Starks, and then we'll have a free-for-all with the students, okay?
Sounds great. Yes, so thanks so much for doing this, Dr. Kuhn, and it's nice to see all of you. I recognize some of you. I think I would just sort of echo all of the sentiments that I heard here today. And I think one of the things that I would like to stress sort of moving forward is the importance of making good relationships with your undergraduate professors and undergraduate mentors so that they can write you really good letters of recommendation, because those are really what is going to sort of make, or if you can have very personalized and very direct letters of recommendation from people who know you very well and can speak not only to your academic prowess, but your character and your personality, those things matter. And I know personally that my PhD supervisor, who I spent 7 years working with, and who still, when I finally just published my book a couple weeks ago, and he said, yes, I'm free from you, because now he doesn't have to write me reference letters anymore after, almost a 12-year period of him having to support me to get to this sort of this stage in my academic journey. But one of the reasons he actually chose me to be part of his, like an advisee, was that my MA supervisor, my MA supervisor had written that I, had a good sense of humor and that I was nice to be around, which I think matters for professors too. Like, this is a large commitment on their part to take someone on for 6, 7, 5 years. So, knowing that this person is going to be a good contribution to the department and a nice, someone who's like pleasant to be around is kind of important, and an important decision that professors make. So, forging those relationships with your undergrad professors at this stage, I think, is an important one, much more so than, your scores on standardized tests and things like that. Yeah, and I'm going to leave it at that. And
Can I just chime in about that really quickly? So one of my friends, he actually decided to come to the Boston area for law school as part of his graduate studies. And he, as part of his application, needed a letter from someone he had known for, I think it said like 7 to 10 years. So if you are applying to programs who have like something very specific like that, you might also want to think about friendships that you've had for a long time and people who could write a letter for you. My friend asked me to write a letter for him because he needed someone who he'd had in his life for that long of a time, and he didn't have a professor, that he had known for that long. Yeah. So sometimes you can think about people who have, had some kind of great impact or some kind of great relationship with you, who can then speak to your qualifications in graduate school.
No, absolutely. And in terms of like choosing programs, and I think that the advice that Curry gave is great. Just like you really, your best resource is someone who at the university who is working on that topic or something closely related to that topic. At least being able to sort of help you mold what you're interested in, where you're interested in going. So I'm going to leave it at that and maybe let Dr. Starks chime in.
All right, yes, I'd like to introduce you two historians, but hey, historians are bossy and have good advice. Dr. Trish Starks, who works on Russian Soviet history, the history of medicine, history of public health. Both Hammond and Starks are from disciplines which require massive language training. If anybody's thinking about that too, and same with soon to be Professor Doss, that's another issue we can explore. So take it away, Starks.
I want to reiterate what Kelly has said of building those relationships with your teachers at undergrad so that they can really put together nice letters for you. They'll also help you with things like your CV, help you with your writing samples. They're happy to help. And so they also have a lot of connectivity out there to tell you about pitfall schools or places where you might not want to go because there's knowledge that is not always spoken freely about what schools might have some problems that you just don't see on those websites. And so having a strong relationship with your undergraduate advisors is really going to be helpful moving forward. But for my part, I wanted to emphasize that need for sometimes for a little bit more training, especially in language, but also in, I've been seeing a lot of students going on for MD, PhDs. And what they're doing is taking a gap year to either go and work in country or do an MA or do a Master's of Public Health or something along those lines, something that's a production that's going to help them in further kind of building up their portfolio. Peace Corps. It's different kinds of gap year experiences or even 2-year experiences that give you something that help you to stand out from the rest of the group. So that's what I was just going to add in there, is that you can use that gap year to really expand your opportunities, of course, and have a good time and maybe go teach English somewhere or do a Fulbright, do something that also then makes you a very attractive candidate for for grad study in other ways.
Yeah, great advice from our faculty. So I'm going to throw it back open. Now we have a free for all. No one is safe, our alumni or our faculty. So let's go ahead, and anything you want to ask. You can see this is super laid back. So whatever you want to ask. You've been given great advice by everybody. All right, Megan, I'm going to let you handle the Q&A again.
Yes. Terrell, did you raise your hand? Sorry if I said it.
Yes. So just to keep in mind, just a question thing to put in the back of my pocket. What's the trajectory for someone becoming a professor? Do they like get their master's first and then their doctorate and then they do the professor thing? Or is it like one big long program and then do the
I think it depends. I did a separate master's at Simon Fraser University before I entered the PhD program, and that was just at Georgetown. But there were people in my program that did masters and then went right into their PhD. So actually, I have 2 master's degrees because I got a master's when I finished my comprehensive exams at Georgetown. So that's sort of the way that works. But if that's really like an individual choice that you're going to have to make for yourself. And for me, like I wasn't ready when I was 22 years old to commit to a 7-year program. I just didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, and I wanted to travel more. And so my sort of schooling evolved a bit more organically. And then that actually, the time that I spent living in China really formulated a lot of the research questions that I had that I brought with me to my PhD program. So I don't think that there's one specific route that you need to take to get there. I think that it really is dependent on what kind of person you are, how you want to formulate your own career, and how much funding you get. You should never, ever take on debt, as Curry said, to do a PhD program. Sometimes you will need to fund an MA, but if you're doing a PhD in the humanities, you cannot take on 7 years of debt to do that. It's absolutely, because you'll never make the money back.
Terrell, I hate to ask you the question that I asked everybody, but what do you have a discipline? Do you know what you want to do?
I'm majoring in English education now, so I'm really planning to be a high school teacher. But just in case, I was wondering about the professor thing. Just curious, because I also didn't know if I was supposed to do, or if I could do a master's in, like, what good would a master's in education do me, or do a master's in English so I could teach, so I could just have a better expertise in English.
I know that some of the people that I know who are, you know, colleagues of mine, and then some people who are people who have, you know, they've been in my life and then they've been out of my life. They don't always have a PhD to be a professor. So some of the people that I know have master's degrees in education or master's degrees in English language arts, and then they will be what's called an adjunct professor at various schools. So again, I think to reiterate what someone else just said, it kind of depends on your own path and what you want to do. I also know people who, after they did the education program with me, they went on to teach for a few years and then decided, you know, maybe I want to pursue a PhD. So it could be a situation like that where you get a master's degree and then, you know, you want to take some time off from school before you kind of figure out what you want to do with a PhD. I know for me personally, by the time I was done with my master's and I had been, you know, in school for forever, I was not interested in doing a PhD. The longer that I have been teaching, the more I kind of wonder or think about, do I want to go back to school, or do I want to, there's a degree in education that some districts here recognize called a Certificate of Advanced Graduate Studies. So that's a certificate that I could get in which I wouldn't be getting a PhD, but I could become licensed to become an administrator. So there's always, I think, different paths that you can take that might lead you, you know, in one direction or another. More school is best in terms of opportunities that you get, for sure, because the more qualified you are, the more you can, you know, kind of market yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah, all I can add is if you get a master's in English, that's going to be more intensive study of literature and periods of literature. More, for most programs, they're going to be trying to train you to become a scholar of English, and preparing you to become a PhD student in English. And so most people that I know, they go to a program that kind of brings them on for both the master's degree in English and the PhD in English. And my program lets us take a thought after we finish the MA, and maybe we want to stop. Maybe we want to take that and apply to some other school, or maybe we just want to stop full on. After you get your PhD, you apply either to become an adjunct professor. Adjunct professors have fixed term contracts, so they are given jobs year to year depending on the university's needs. And then, or you apply to assistant professorships. Assistant professorships are tenure track opportunities, and usually you're given a few years to meet certain goals in teaching and research. And then if you do that, say over 6 years, then you become what's called an associate professor, and an associate professor has tenure. Tenure makes you very difficult to fire. And then if you distinguish yourself and you do even better at that level, you become what's called a full professor. And these are the kinds of people with, you know, elbow patches and chalk on their lapels and things like that. And they're wonderful. So usually when we think just professor in our mind, we're thinking full professor. It's a very long road to get there. But that's the journey. From PhD, you go to assistant, and from assistant to associate, and then to full. But that's not the path that everybody takes. It's becoming a lot more diverse over time.
Thank God. Because that sounds like a lot.
It is a lot. And I think it's something that I think Miss Hammond was saying, you kind of want to be committed. You want to make sure that you're researching something or that you're studying something that is going to energize you, as opposed to something that is going to overwhelm you whenever you try to do that kind of path.
Yeah, academia is a long game. It's a slow game. It's assuming it assumes that you're going to put a lot of time into it, and it's very no other career path really asks you, unless you're becoming like a Catholic priest or something. No other career path says, "Hey, look 2 decades down the road and figure out what you want to be," you know, or anything like that. You just sort of hop onto the job and then try to get the promotion. But know this, just because you have to think about that doesn't mean you have to be in it for those 14 years. If you get in for 2 years for the master's and you really like it, you can continue. If you get the master's and you're like, I want to go off and try something new, you can. You have agency to change your story, because nobody has to just sit on the little rails that are set for them. You can choose to do something different.
Yeah, and when you research the programs, they will generally tell you, I believe, if you have that kind of opt-out option after you get the master's. So if that's something that you're not sure if you want to continue on to the PhD, then you want to make sure to choose programs that allow you to pause at that point.
I will say that a lot of graduate programs too are adding non-academic tracks for higher degrees. That's more and more common, because PhDs in the humanities do lead to a lot of great things. As much as it pains for me to say it, over and beyond being professors, the best job on the planet.
I don't know, I might argue with you about that. I think working with kids is pretty amazing.
That's what I was thinking. That's why I was on the edge
All
about
right, teaching is the best
Yeah.
job on the planet. I agree with that. It's tough,
Yeah.
though, right?
Teaching is awesome. It is tough, but it's awesome. The amount of power that we wield, I think, is amazing.
So I think I saw Olivia raise your hand. Do you have a question still?
Yeah, so I don't know, this is like such a super broad question. I don't even know if I want to ask it, but Dean Kuhn, like, so what would be some other things you do with graduate degrees outside of teaching? I feel like that's just like what everyone does, but obviously there's
No.
other things.
No. Publishing. I had a lot of colleagues that actually, in fact, a good friend of mine is acquisitions editor at Cornell. And I went to graduate school with him, and he was a medievalist. I've seen people go into business. Humanists with higher degrees are brilliant managers, better than anybody else, basically. We usually end up running, don't tell Corey I said this, but the humanists usually end up managing the accountants. All these people that go off and make a lot of money up front, they don't often go all the way up. So humanists have gone into, NGO work, people with PhDs, right? Fundraising. I mean, it's vast and diverse, just as undergraduate leave, but I do think having a graduate degree is a plus. Graduate school is worth the ride, right? I think we can all say that have done it, because you meet the most amazing people. Also, your peers, the faculty are cool too, but it's your graduate peers that I remember as being particularly great. But I'll let other people chime in.
Yeah, I agree that your peers are amazing. Some of my my closest friends that I have right now are people that I met during graduate school, and I've been able to continue to have, relationships with them over the last 10 years. And it's awesome just because I feel like I know people who do so many different things. As I said earlier, a lot of the people that I went to school with, they don't actually teach right now because they've all gone off and they're doing other things. Some of them work in government, as somebody stated in the chat. Some of them work in schools that are private schools. Some of them have started schools. They've started charter schools. So the peer relationships that you develop in graduate school can be super fulfilling, I think.
Oh, and because I went to, because I was in Georgetown in Washington, D.C., a lot of my colleagues who had high level language training in like Turkish or Russian or things like this have gone into either policy jobs or government jobs and have very fulfilling careers that they very much enjoy. Working in some capacity, developing foreign policy, or, so there are the there are lots of different options depending on sort of what track you're taking, and you can sort of market the skills that you have to different types of jobs. So.
And I've known several PhDs who have gone on to administration in education, advising, and gone up in that path, not so much the teaching path. But a good friend of mine from grad school is the wing historian for the military, for the air base that comes out of Utah. And so he writes the history of the wing. He gets deployed. He was not a military guy when he was in grad school, but that's what he has become this historian of the military that actually deploys out with the military and travels the world that way. I've known others that have gone into diplomatic service. And then again, that MD PhD route, one of my good friends, he researched the history of tuberculosis in Russia, and now is a lead from University of Pennsylvania at their medical school on their MRSA team, looking at the MRS disease that came out of the one that was transferred by camels in the early 2000s. He's trying to find kind of the cures for that and researches that disease team. But he still occasionally shows up at our conferences and talks about tuberculosis in Russia. So he combined his interest in MD, multi-drug resistant TB, with history and with an MD, and is doing great work. And so there are a lot of options out there.
Olivia, what do you study?
Creative writing, actually. So yeah.
Yeah, I know people in creative writing who have gone into things like advertising. It takes a little bit of networking and informational interviews and stuff to figure out how to do that, but they are very good with words, and people need people who are good with words. Depending on how far you went with that, there are people with arts degrees who do work in museums as well.
I was going to mention that, like curating or directing museums is something that a lot of people who do that have backgrounds in the humanities.
Mm-hmm. There are government programs that have to do with, spreading the arts and things like that. Things like the National Endowment of the Arts, National Endowment of Humanities. People need to work for these things, and they do things like set up public events and all kinds of stuff like that. If you just go into the rhetoric world, I know a person who, she was getting her PhD in Pennsylvania, but her husband lived in Silicon Valley. He had a job out there. So she knew after PhD, she was going there, which when you don't have geographic flexibility, it's hard to become a professor. But so she tailored her PhD so that she was really good at a discipline called technical writing, which has to do with things like writing instruction sets and things like that. So when she came out, she was really marketable to those places because her PhD had her working with similar materials. So if you know a couple of years out that you want to do something else, you can tailor the PhD work to help you do that.
Super advice. So we're about an hour in. This is great. We need to do more of this. Yeah. I thought I would call for some final words of advice from our panelists. Why don't we start with Jean Jones?
Sure. I think I would just say, try not to stress too much. It's probably easier said than done, but it's something that I have to remind myself of all the time with my regular job, but then also just in terms of thinking about graduate school. I said this earlier, but I'll reiterate because I think it's important. You might have a path and you might deviate from that path, and I think that's okay. I think that, lots of people have different paths that take them in different directions, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think in the grand scheme of life, for a lot of people, life is long. And so, if you take a circuitous route to getting to, whatever fulfills you, then that's completely fine, as long as you get to whatever that place is eventually.
All right. How about Jacob Doss? Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I was going to say maybe a little bit more nuts and bolts here, but for me, I took time off to apply Both times I applied for my master's and my PhD. Had about a year between each of those because it's a lot of work. But as difficult as it was getting in, and then as difficult as the work is, it really is an incredible thing to do. It's allowed me to live in other parts of the world. You know, like we said before, I've met a ton of incredible people, and I mean, it is still, you know, you're doing something that you know, hopefully that you love every day. And it is fun, it's interesting, and you're always learning something new. So there's a lot of naysayers about grad school right now because the job market is difficult, and it is, and all of that's true, and you should definitely think about all of this. But it really is an incredible opportunity to do a lot of stuff that most people don't get to do. So don't be afraid to jump in and do it.
All right, let's turn to Curry Kennedy.
Well, I was thinking just now about what you said, Dean Kuhn, at the beginning about it being a calling to go into graduate study or into the humanities. And, you know, a calling sounds like a big, mysterious thing. I definitely think there's some sort of transcendent summons that you feel because you're just entranced by these things that you study. But I think the basic thing, what it means to go after a calling is to go after a thing where the money isn't number one. Money is an important thing. Nobody lives without money. But in Citizen Kane, there's this moment where this guy says, making money is not a difficult thing if all you care about is making a lot of money. And so if you take this option, you know, you might see your friends parallel with you on the life track who are who are becoming doctors and accountants, and they're going to have a house 10 years before you or something like that. But there's something inherently ennobling about humanistic study. And it's a brave thing for you guys to be considering this, and I'm impressed. I'm grateful that you guys are doing that.
All right, faculty, faculty will get the final word. You guys can duke it out over who goes first.
I'll go first.
All right.
I just want to echo everything that everyone else has already said. And, you know, it is a big commitment. It is, you know, I grew up in Toronto and have sort of, you know, ended up living in Northwest Arkansas. And, you know, this is something that happens when you go into academia. You don't really get to choose where you end up. So, you know, these are things that you sort of need to consider before you make these big decisions. But like everyone else has said, they don't need to be finalized today. So just make good decisions for yourself at different times. And yeah, again, if you have questions or comments, feel free to ask any of us. I think everyone would be very happy to send more students into PhD programs or graduate programs in the humanities.
Right on. All right,
Yeah, I don't know what I can add, but to reiterate what Kuna said, it's a great job. We get paid to read books. We get paid to read more books. I don't know. Quarantine lifestyle has really suited me because this is the cloister is it echoes the cloister, a lot of the full academic life being a professor, but there are other options. If you like the research and you'd like to keep on reading, but you'd also like to talk to others, there are other options out there where you still can take that humanities and help communicate with others. I mean, historians, we prefer to communicate with the dead, but some people like to talk to the living. And it is an option out there. And humanities is that connectivity, bringing us together with others, and whether they be thousands of years dead or just sitting across the table from you, maybe someday, eventually again. And so it really is a wonderful living feeling to be involved in the humanities.
Yes, wow, poetic. Yeah, humanists are the best people. Let's face it. If you're going to go out and talk to somebody at a cafe, who are you going to pick? Just Just saying. Well, I'd also like to introduce my two partners in crime. And that's Monica Moore, who works in the Honors College and is our super impressive pre-health professional and humanistic, comes from a communication background. And Louise Hancox, who's a doctor of history, plus has the MBA in the supply chain. So it's a super interesting combination. But I don't know if you, Monica and Louise, want to give the parting farewell comments. Why not? Go for it.
I'll get mine in before Monica then. Yes, I love the whole thing. I love the follow the path. You don't need to know what you're really doing 10 years out. I've never known what I'm doing 10 years out. And that's why I got an MBA and a PhD in history. So come and see us if you need any help with figuring out all of this stuff too.
All right, Monica, take it away.
Yeah, it's great to see all of you here, and it gives me a lot of joy to make connections with students. Some I actually got to work with, one who's here today, that it was just a chance meeting. So Jean, I worked with her as an advisor when I was with the Fulbright Honors Program back when she was an undergrad. So it's been years ago. And I'll tell you, I wasn't in that job for very long because I got to work with honor students like Jean and like you, and I loved learning myself. And I thought, well, I can't walk up and down the 5th floor of Old Main for the rest of my life. And I was 30 when I went to graduate school to work on a PhD in communication studies at the University of Minnesota. So, you know, my path is a little untraditional, non-traditional. Most of my cohort, they were a bit younger than I was. And I'm ABD. I don't know how you pronounce that professionally, but I think going on to graduate school is, it's a time for growth. It allows you to learn about the world, to mature, to think about, you know, what is it that you really think and believe, and how do you want to make a difference in your life, with your life? And, you know, things just happen to take me back to the University of Arkansas, which I always wanted. I wasn't sure how I was going to make that happen. I thought, if I can't be like a top tier researcher, well, I have this field, this advising that I can fall back on. And now I get to pull Jean in, and I think I'll be in touch with Curry from now on. And it's wonderful to make connections and know that they do go on and that my work is important. So it's neat to be part of this conversation. And I do hope to see more of these types of programs. Padma, by the way, has a very interesting path as well to her creative writing. And so maybe she could join us if we ever do a panel like this again. Because I mean, she, you know, talk about an exploring major and not knowing exactly what you want to do. That's what life is all about, just the journey. So I'll shut up. We've been here for a long time.
No, that's great, actually. And you're right. We certainly will do this again. And of course, you know, having students is your greatest legacy. I mean, I think publishing books is awesome, but as my advisor always said, the true legacy are the people that you train.